Our final session of this global collaboration track today is called Perspectives on Global Trade and Commercialization. Our moderator is Dr. Carl Williams of CJW Quantum Consulting, and our panelists are Melissa LaReau, International Trade Administration, Roger McKinlay, UKRI, and Dr. Rajat Ghosh, National Quantum Strategy Secretariat, the Government of Canada. Please join me in welcoming Carl, Melissa, Roger, and Raj.
So good day, my name's Carl Williams. For those of you who don't know me, I spent most of my career working for the US government at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, ran the quantum program from the time it was formally established in 2000 to where I retired at the end of 2021. I also helped set up the first interagency working group within the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Bush administration and continued on into the Obama administration. So I've had a lot of engagement here, and I am fortunate to have three wonderful guests here to help that I get to ask all the hard questions for today, which is always the pleasure of asking the question instead of having to answer them. So it is my pleasure to introduce my panelists, Melissa LaReau, Raj McKinlay, and Rajat Ghosh. And with that, I will start with letting Melissa briefly introduce herself, and we'll just pass it down the line.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. Thanks for moderating. I also wanted to thank George for inviting me to speak, and Celia, because she was the one who suggested I come here and talk about ITA's work in supply chains and quantum. I'm Melissa LaReau. I'm the Quantum Technologies Lead at the International Trade Administration, and I'm in the Industry and Analysis Division. So I've really enjoyed talking to everyone this past year, interacting with the interagency, talking to different companies with the QEDC, doing site visits and things like that. And actually, instead of introducing myself so much, I want to introduce my agency because I know ITA is new on this stage. So ITA is one of 13 bureaus within the Department of Commerce. Our global network of industry experts focus on promoting the US exports, attracting inbound investment, providing actionable data, and protecting industry competitiveness. So we're in 3 business units. It's global markets, enforcement and compliance, and industry and analysis. So global markets assists and advocates for US businesses in international markets. Enforcement and compliance ensures a level playing field with US industries defending against unfair trade practices and ensuring compliance with trade agreements, with existing trade agreements. And then industry and analysis provides actionable data and analysis, including our work on supply chains. So I sit in manufacturing, which is one of 6 divisions within INA, and my office is the Office of Information and Communication Technologies. So our team covers a wide range of industries, including photonics, AI, cybersecurity, semiconductors, quantum technologies, and much more. And we know that our companies right now depend on strong and resilient competitive supply chains to secure materials and components. And that's why we're working so hard to understand quantum computing supply chains. It's really the first step to supporting resilient and transparent supply chains, both within the United States and with our partners around the world.
Roger.
Roger McKinlay from UK Research and Innovation. We're an arm's length, I think we're discussing, weren't we, Carl? What's the name? Non-departmental, an arm's length bit of the UK government, containing the research councils who fund a lot of academic research, and a slightly different animal called Innovate UK funds industry to work alongside universities. We've been running a program now for 5 years of funding quantum programs run by companies, and we're beginning to transition now from not just funding through grants, project activity, but actually helping bits of government procure quantum computers and other quantum technology. It's early days, and the vehicle we use allows us to procure equipment for use, so government departments can get used to using quantum technologies, and at the same time allows us to fund to some extent some of research and development. So and we see this trend now being very important as companies not only require support and grant funding, but they also need early customers for their products.
Rajat.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rajat Ghosh. I sit on the National Quantum Strategy Secretariat of Canada. Our main role is to ensure that Canada has a robust and vibrant domestic industrial ecosystem in quantum. To that end, we coordinate a number of governmental programs from within our own ministry and as well as departmental agencies and portfolio partners, ranging from basic research through commercialization, procurement, and adoption.
So we've heard from our three panelists. I want to just kind of set the stage. Most of you are quite probably aware governments around the world are investing. And we all know when we talk to each other and talk to our companies that we are going to have to work globally, that no one is going to own the whole supply chain here or anything else. But at the same time, we also understand that the technology is sensitive because it has national security implications as well as economic competitive implications. And so it's a complex place in which to work. And so it's really great to have this panel and be able to ask some fun and invigorating questions. So some of this was touched on already, but I will start with Rajat, and we'll come back this way on the first question. So could you talk about how the changing landscape in quantum requires multiple government agency involvement and how you specifically fit into the space?
No, that's a great question. I think quantum technologies comprise such a wide variety of different modalities and technologies, and they're all at different levels of maturity. So for instance, you're looking at quantum computing that needs some very basic research in order to enable development of new technologies in qubits. If you're looking at quantum sensors, that's a different play. That's where we're actually looking at procurement and adoption. So we have agencies and programs that focus on that. And then we also have programs that are set to allow multilateral and bilateral connections, which are really necessary for certain types of projects related to quantum communications, for instance, to ensure that as we develop these technologies, they're interoperable so that we can all work together.
Roger.
I think there's two aspects to this. One is, of course, if you start saying how you're going to coordinate within quantum, is how you're going to coordinate outside quantum as well. And how do you deal with the near technologies, which some people might say, that's almost quantum, why not fund that instead? And I think that there's a simple answer to that, which is, I agree completely with what you're saying about that it's a complex spread of technologies. If you want to make things happen, first of all, make sure you're funding some of the physics. All right? If you're not funding the physics, we're not going to develop quantum computers or quantum sensors. And then you also, and that's one of my arguments when someone says, isn't it a sort of AI? I say, no, you've got to fund the physics. And you've also got to fund the engagement and the application, which you might call a use case or an end user, but you've got to be looking at that end as well. Now, in terms of coordination within government, one of the things I think which is easily overlooked is actually coordinating government as a user. This is not a consumer technology, it's a business-to-business technology, and initially it's going to be pretty grown-up businesses trying to use it, and that's what governments are. So I think we also need to remember, coordinate government as a potential user of the technology.
So, early adopters.
Early adoption.
Yes.
Early adoption, absolutely.
Melissa.
Well, I think I'm going to take a moment here to talk about the changing landscape and from obviously US perspective. So we've talked a lot about the National Quantum Initiative Act and the reauthorization. So in 2018, the NQI focused on R&D. The Act provided for a federal program to accelerate quantum research and development for economic and national security. Now there's a lot of talk about this reauthorization. In the original NQI, there was no mention of supply chains, and I think commercialization was mentioned twice. But if you look at the provisional amendments in the House, supply chains are mentioned 6 times, and commercialization is mentioned 18 times. So there's this shift in thinking, right? ITA provides a unique forward-looking commercial perspective that goes beyond R&D. And let's just take it back to 1 year ago. So we thought, okay, let's get involved for the space, learn about quantum, see what others are doing, and see if we fit in. And fast forward to 1 year later, our perspective is we absolutely have a role in this place. Companies are needing our services now, and really insight and perspective from an economic and trade perspective is very helpful, and companies are already asking for it. So when we go out and we talk to different companies, They're sharing their challenges with us. They're asking for assistance with market access, exports, being connected to other companies, other agencies, asking to invest in the United States, and asking to compete abroad, and how we can be helpful in this. And as was mentioned before, right, there are quantum companies, quantum adjacent companies, quantum enabling companies. They all depend on resilient supply chains. They all have challenges, and we help all of them, big and small. Furthermore, ITA has been asked to talk about its work on CSIS roundtables, in panels like these at Quantum World Congress, and at QEDC plenary events and other events as well. And every time I talk about the work ITA is doing, I get stopped. I already have a meeting after this panel, and I have a flood of emails in my inbox after conferences. So it's just showing that there is a need for a different perspective in this, and I think we will continue to be useful as the market matures.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting in watching the answers to the first question, because we just see how complex it is, even from a government perspective and the supply chain and everything else. And while we could spend all of our time just digging farther down this first question, I want to go on to the next one, which is, you know, at a micro level, firms are competing against each other to advance quantum solutions. Are there areas where broad collaboration, cooperation are needed to make the quantum sector successful? And with that one, let's start with Melissa and go back down the other direction.
Sure, and I will just start by saying I think we will also have a different answer on this question. But I'm going to focus at everything we've heard today, right? Even when Stu and George were talking, we can't do this alone. We need a lot of collaboration. From our perspective, that is why we're specifically starting with supply chains, right? So our companies need inputs, materials, components from abroad, and the supply chain is inherently global and international, and we need to be working with our partners to see how we can move this industry forward. So I would say that is where we have largely been focused.
I would use a parallel here, which was the smartphone business. When it got to a stage where processing power had increased and the 3 or 4 key manufacturers in the world realized they were all about to launch phones which would have a battery life of about an hour. And they said, we collectively better get the lithium ion battery business going. And the amazing thing was they managed to get enough money into that business for it to deliver. So I would say the heat map you look at is, where is this technology mind-bogglingly expensive? And then if we over-constrain that, and by that I mean we've got to let companies specialize, and we've got to let some standardization appear in architectures, and then we've actually got to let those companies compete and be commercially efficient. If we over-constrain that, we're going to slow things down. So where this coordination is really needed and collaboration is needed is on the expensive bits.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think there's this myth that one company can develop one product that will be adopted or used. Generally, these technologies are incredibly complicated. If you look at a quantum computer, you have the hardware side, you have the algorithm side, you have the error correction side, you have the end user piece to it. So you need to have collaboration across industries, across countries. Some of that could even be, even with governmental help, benchmarking, development of standards, developing the new technologies to begin with. There's a limited amount of quantum expertise. We need researchers to work together. We have a limited amount of resources. We need to be able to share infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for collaboration in this space that would benefit a wide swath of the sector.
So again, this is quite interesting because in some ways you all touched on key things. You've touched on the fact that there are some hard tech problems that we may need to commonly work on. You've touched on interoperability. You've touched on helping each other get market access. You've touched on a number of other things. So we see that we all recognize the need to collaborate and to develop. Yeah, we all would like to have winners in our own country. We would also like to be sure there are competitors in the market and everything else. So when you look across the globe and you start thinking about firms developing quantum products, how can we ensure interoperability, and that all these different technologies will work together. And of course, it may be that the little quantum processor sitting in that quantum repeater is a very different technology from the one that is actually in the main computing center, where that's QPUs, CPUs, and everything else are. So let's start again, this time with Roger, and let's talk a little bit about the issue of interoperability and the problems around and what government should be doing here.
Well, I mean, first of all, most of my career in industry, I kind of, with my government colleagues, point out that you do not need to incentivize companies to find the biggest market they can for their products and so on. So regulation and standardization is simply not something which governments impose on companies. They're something which companies need to be able to trade. Now, it doesn't mean behavior is good and they collaborate in the way they should, but there's a very strong incentive on companies to actually address interoperability and address ways in working together. There are certainly fields which are interoperably rich, like the communications side, and on quantum networking we're going to see some of that. But also there are businesses which require interchangeability. One day a quantum computer will be part of a complex business operation or a complex piece of infrastructure. And people who make those kinds of capital procurements actually want to know that in the future they might be able to swap out a computer. You know, a bit like the comment my father made on the first car I bought. He said, "Have you thought about jacking up the radio and changing the car?" All right. So these are the things which I think industry is well incentivized to do. And I think one of like with a lot of government activity, how can you bring out the best in these players and help them collaborate on these key issues of, for example, standardization?
Rajat.
Yeah, I think I'd want to add that some of these technologies have such long development times that makes it challenging to think about interoperability in the near term, although that is something that's an important issue. So I think one way around it, one focus could be to enable mechanisms for cross-border collaboration, whether that be MOUs or other programs, to in some ways subsidize or offset the collaboration that companies are doing. Because in this space, we have to recognize a number of companies are SMEs. They're not multinational companies, they're very small, sometimes they're very small teams, and they might not have the resources or the technical ability to call up a firm across the globe and navigate that connection.
Great. Well, very good answers. And I think we also heard companies talking today, right, about interoperability. I think one of our roles as ITA, especially working so close with industry, is to find out what these challenges are and kind of help them along and bring them into the right discussions. So we mentioned standards over here. That is NIST, right, another agency. And there are a lot of agencies poised to work with a lot of these different issues. So I think the best that we can do is to keep learning from industry, listening, and bringing it into our interagency conversations to help see which agency can bring that forward from our perspective.
Yeah. So again, you know, and just coming back to this briefly, because one talked about benchmarking. It's not only just about interoperability, but it's also being able to compare and determine which is the best product, and you know, why we can't guarantee what happens in the Betamax versus VHS. We would like to assume that we create a fair playing floor for technology to displace each other when one is a clear win over another. How does this play into this kind of a problem of interoperability, standardization, benchmarking? Because those are all kinds of early components.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start. I will say, you know, benchmarking and some of these other issues still probably are better having those conversations with other agencies. But when we talk about a level playing field, I think that can be left to interpretation and means different things for different people in different agencies. I think especially for us in ITA, it means, you know, when we're having these conversations, when we're having these dialogues, when we're thinking about future trade agreements, to make sure that not only are we discussing other products and issues, but when we are coming to this, we're incorporating critical emerging technologies, including quantum, and bringing those into the dialogues and conversations.
I would say, and there are some very good benchmarking activities going on, and it's It's akin to this whole business of metrology, for example, as well. It's how are you going to guarantee the quantumness of certain products. The most important thing is, and some industries lose their way, is that the way companies choose to compete is on sensible things like cost and so on, and not on who can confuse and dupe the customer into thinking their computer is better than someone else's or more suited to that task. So you actually need an industry which generally is trying to help, and it's so important. A brand new technology face up to customers who don't really understand what it's capable of, but want to understand the capability. And if you want that market to come forward and welcome you, you can start selling stuff. I would have thought being sensible and level-headed and honest and transparent and collaborative is essential from that point.
No, I agree with Roger completely. I think I just want to piggyback on that. I mean, if you want the quantum sector to be successful, the technologies have to be adopted, but an end user can't adopt it or even know what the technology is capable of unless there's some transparent way to communicate, some sort of common framework or language. And benchmarking, I think, really contributes to that.
Yeah. So it's clear that collaboration, cooperation are needed both between the industrial players and between the governments and everything else. So let's move on to another key problem that keeps coming up, and that is, parts of the quantum supply chain already exist, and an increasing number of companies have quantum projects. What are the risks in introducing export controls, regulations, and other things? And can we be snatching defeat from the jaws of victory? And of course, it's also important to understand why we might need those export controls as well. So why don't we start with Rajat on this one and see your views on this?
Yeah, it's a challenging problem because some of the tech, well, even determining what to control. If you're looking at quantum computers, a fault-tolerant quantum computer doesn't exist, and that's presumably what export controls are attempting to regulate. So the more controls you have on budding businesses, it's very challenging for them to scale, grow, enter new markets. It's a question of whether these export controls are just another layer of paperwork, whether they're parallel to an existing process, or whether they're really, or exactly how much teeth they have. Now, it's understood that a lot of these technologies are dual use, and in some sense, export controls can be beneficial because you want to be, if you're selling a dual use technology, you want to sell to markets that, of like-minded nations. So it's a challenging problem. I think we want to ensure that it doesn't restrict the growth of business, especially some that are very early stage, but at the same time, we recognize there's a need to ensure security.
I would go slightly further forward in time and saying what is inevitably going to happen if quantum computers, for example, as one example, are going to be affordable. And we're going to see SMEs and small companies grow, but we're also going to have to see some global players because that's where you get the efficiency from. And having been part of global companies, where you're operating in multiple countries, you end up with decisions about where you're going to do your R&D, where you're going to do your manufacturing, and who you want to sell to. And in the company I work for, we called it country of source, country of destination. And in terms of your operations and where you can get skills and what you do, you really want total flexibility as to where you do those three things, where you design, where you manufacture, and where you sell. But when you've got sensitive technologies, it introduces constraints. And the key thing is going to be not to overburden an industry which we want to grow as rapidly and efficiently as possible to serve the market it's creating. And so I would say any kind of regulations have to be with caution and have to take that macroscopic view and not just go too far with a microscope and look at individual situations and individual components and individual technologies.
Great. Well, and while Roger said he was going to bring this forward, I'm going to dial it back and say, as a reminder of one of the 13 bureaus under the Department of Commerce, this is a great question, but it's one best answered by the Bureau of Industry and Security under the Department of Commerce. I know I've been getting a lot of questions about the rules that were released last week. I will say that I believe that the QEDC will be having an informational session, probably with NIST and BIS, so look forward to that. But also BIS is welcoming public comments, so if you have comments on that, the Federal Register is open, so feel free to go there, read about the export controls, and leave comments.
So I want to come back with one follow-up in part. Roger, you talked about big companies and how they deal with this issue. What about the impact of these kind of rules and regulations on small companies? They don't have the big compliance departments. They don't have the lawyers in-house and all the other stuff. If each of you would talk about how you see the impact of these kind of regulations affecting these startups, the small companies in the supply chain, and others that are going to be impacted.
I can give you very tangible examples. We're funding several hundred projects, and occasionally we experience delays, and it's very, very easy for a 6-month delay to come in because of the availability of a part, and that won't necessarily be down to restrictions. It's just the chip failed, all right, and it has to be done again. So that is a symptom of a supply chain which has yet to become robust, okay? So, and it causes real problems. It stops companies delivering on what they've promised, and I'd say that's probably the biggest concern is for a little company, a 6-month delay to being able to ship something and get the revenue is a serious issue.
I think we have to remember a lot of the SMEs are pre-revenue. Not all, and they're very small teams, and many of them are offshoots from academic labs. So translating the requirements of what to do and the expertise of how to navigate any type of export regulation, it's challenging. It can be challenging. I understand the importance of it, but it can be difficult.
And I won't touch on this from export control specifically, but when we're talking about small and medium-sized enterprises, I know that we have talked a lot about different-sized companies being involved, right? And we want different-sized companies who don't have maybe a government affairs person aware of the types of services and the work that we do. So I know you were at the QEDC panel, plenary, when we put on a panel, all of commerce. NIST moderated, we had ITA, we had BIS, actually, and then we had somebody from our U.S. Commercial Service office. And we are trying to do more outreach, specifically so companies who are smaller and don't have a government affairs representative can know what kind of work that we do and what kind of services we offer to be of assistance in this. So if somebody comes and says, okay, we don't understand these regulations, how can we get in contact with somebody from your office to learn more about them? We want to be able to help. So feel free, if there's anybody in here who wants to learn more about anything that I have specifically discussed today, feel free to find me afterwards, and I would be more than happy to explain or connect you to the right office who could give you more information.
So we come down to our last 2 minutes, and so what I want to really do on the last 2 minutes is basically start with Rajat and come back this way and give each of you roughly a minute to state anything else that you would like to add. I think it's been a great conversation, but you may have some final thoughts.
I think my final thoughts are, in order to grow the quantum sector, we can't do it alone. I think it needs work and collaboration between academia, industry, and government, and that each has their own role and their own expertise to offer.
I would say we know that in a new technology that support from government funding is important, but the real message I always put out is to the CEOs and those in industry in this space, which is, I think, for a new technology, they have showed enormously sensible behavior in terms of wanting to collaborate with each other and not overstate or oversell the capabilities of what they've got in an area which has huge potential. So please just keep doing that.
Okay. There are so many things I would like to say, but first, I'm very excited to be in this space. I am new, I've been here for about a year, and I would just like to reiterate how much of storytelling is really important in this narrative. So I think part of my job is to kind of interpret, what is being said here and kind of work this into policy dialogues and conversations. So the more that I can learn and kind of learn to talk about quantum, how it's important, how it can impact this industry, the market, the better I am able to tell these stories and talk to them about my colleagues. And I think that's very common for others as well who are not specifically in this industry.
So I would like to thank my panelists. Again, it's quite remarkable. I think hopefully you walk away and you understand that government has a role, Industry has a role, academia has a role, we all need to work together, and we all see this as a very positive engagement. So thank you, each of you, for this, your contribution.